Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, if you still had any doubt about the failing democratic credentials of Narendra Modi's India, then you may want to stay tuned as we examine the latest report from Freedom House. And it doesn't make pretty reading if you're a member of the Indian ruling class, who take quite an accountability pasting. In the US, it's the Hindu-American Foundation's turn to face the uncomfortable heat of the spotlight as the Sikh community turn to the Dept of Justice to register them as a foreign agent of India. Let's see how the RSS feels under Trump's inquisitive gaze for a change. And we continue our look at the legacy of Operation Blue Star as the martyrs are remembered with reverence and sorrow, with events planned for this weekend to mark that 41st anniversary. And finally, in Canada, with wildfire season continuing unabated, we have a guide on what to do in preparation for emergency evacuations. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers out there. Luckily, I am on the west coast in Metro Vancouver, so I'm not subject to the fire smoke right now. It seems to all be heading south of the border, Angus. I wonder if we got to pay tariffs on that. But hey, we'll talk about that a little further in a bit.
I dare say Mr. Trump might have a comment or two if he's being invaded by even smoke, so we'll see. But anyway, yes, today's show, James and I will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And as always, we'll be taking a look at loads of great comments at the end of the show, so do stay tuned for that. Right, James, let's get underway. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
Well, let's start off with the wildfire update and where we stand at this point across Canada. It's actually a little early in the wildfire season right now. It is just on the cusp of the beginning. When you look at the devastation that it's already been having on different provinces, but especially in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Now, unlike the rest of the country, there's not a whole lot except for hay bales to try and slow the winds down in both of those provinces. Given that they are in the Maritimes, they are farmland and ranch land, so it is very devastating to those raising livestock and cattle and other farms, as well as the people who are just fleeing their homes. Now, tens of thousands of people are already impacted, not only by the evacuations, but some have just watched as their homes and their cabins and cottages have just burned to the ground. Some have gone back to their communities and found absolutely nothing left. And again, it's a story that we see every wildfire season, but it seems like they are getting worse and worse every year in terms of not only the devastation, but the mass area in which they're covering and burning. And of course, when they're hitting the residential communities, it's always tough to see. Now, as that happens, the forest fire smoke is actually traveling even south of the border into the United States. And of course, that triggers certain areas to issue the Air Quality Advisory Index and to really suggest that anybody with respiratory illness or compromised respiratory systems to stay indoors or limit their time outdoors in order to try to avoid breathing in a lot of that smoke. Now, it is right now being updated as per the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre, that we have over 200 active fires from coast to coast here in Canada at this time, with over half of them being classified as out of control. As I said, Manitoba and Saskatchewan are the hardest ones hit right now. They've actually issued provincial states of emergency for both of those provinces in order to activate further assistance to deal with the devastation and the evacuations, along with the firefighting capabilities when they bring in extra resources and not only financially, but also military resources can become available on request once that state of emergency has been issued. Now, in Manitoba, as I said, thousands of people have been evacuated. And as I said, in Manitoba alone, 17,000 residents are out of their homes right now, with more expected to be evacuated within the next 24 hours. The largest evacuation is happening in Manitoba's history. The communities such as Flin Flon, Pikamacnic, the Cree Nation, as well as the Matthias Column Cree Nation, a lot of the First Nations communities, as well as the Cranberry Portage, they all face dire consequences right now. The conditions are not letting up. It's hot. It's windy. It is just what a fire would consider ideal conditions for rapid spread. And right now it is spanning over 100,000 hectares in certain, that's the White Shell Provincial Park fire. And then you also have other ones near Flin Flon at 38,000 hectares. And the other ones are just going crazy, out of control. But again, the Canadian Armed Forces are assisting with the evacuations as well as deploying aircraft to do airlifts, because some of the communities right now, Angus, have actually been completely blocked in. They can't escape via the highways. They are totally overcome with smoke or fire, and again creates a hazard of these people who really cannot get out fast enough. So they're doing some airlifts and air rescues as well. Right now in the Swan Hills area and in the north, there's over 1.2 million acres have burned already. Now, BC and Ontario are definitely battling our numerous places. We've had some early starts to ours up north in the northern parts of the province, but again, the smoke isn't blowing down this way yet from those fires, but we do anticipate that it will we'll see that over the next week as conditions clear up and the winds gently blow that in. Now, on the screen, you can see this was the Lytton wildfire in British Columbia on June the 30th of 2021. This fire that you see on the screen actually completely decimated the town of Lytton, British Columbia within a 24-hour window. And that gives you some idea of the power and the speed at which these fires can spread and get out of control. There in the center, you see the town burning with the mountains surrounding it, also set ablaze. Those were images, and I also captured video. I was there covering that fire and can tell you the devastation that was witnessed was just unbelievable. Now, the fires that have begun in mid-May this year have already scorched more than 1.58 million acres nationwide, and that's 40% above the 10-year average for this point in the season. So let's take a look quickly here. As I said, that the smoke is traveling south to Montana and other states. But we'll take a quick peek here in the interest of time, going down to just remind you of how you can prepare for any type of natural disaster or evacuation and have yourself ready for that. Have a plan. That's just so essential. Map out your evacuation routes, designate a meeting point, and establish communication methods with your family or friends. So if you have family and friends and you have someone that lives in a different province or a different area, at least where it's safe, then if everybody loses communication in the wildfire zone, at least when they do make it to safety, they can call that one check-in person who can let you know who's checked in and kind of be that response for you to make sure everyone has checked in and are safe after evacuation. Sometimes when you get evacuated, you end up at different evacuation centers. So again, that just helps you to make sure that you have the peace of mind knowing that the rest of your family was able or friends were able to escape and to get to the evacuation points. Make sure that you have your pets included in your plan. Have water and food and carriers ready to evacuate your pets as well. Create an emergency kit. Pack bag with essentials, 3 days worth of non-perishable food and water. And good judgment is a minimum of 1 gallon of water per person per day. Medications, first aid supplies, flashlights, batteries, clothing, important documents. So your passports, your identification, your insurance papers, very important to expedite any claims. Hopefully you don't need it, but it is so important to have that on hand. And remember to have some emergency cash as well, because as the communication systems may be impacted, you won't have the access to use debit, credit cards, or ATM machines. Stay informed, pay attention to your local news, weather, and government sites, emergency alerts, and all of those things. Don't rely on Facebook, as you may be getting out of date or inaccurate information. Make sure that you're going right to the source, Weather Canada, and then each province also has their own emergency sites and services to keep you informed. Clear debris, dry leaves, and anything that's going to actually work as an incendiary on your property. So leaves, dry branches, all of that sort of thing. Make sure your smoke detectors have been checked annually. Change the batteries. Keep fire extinguishers handy and consider a fire-resistant landscaping or sprinklers if you can, but it's more important to be ready to evacuate than it is to worry about trying to challenge the fire in any way. If you can get a hold of masks, respirators, or at least N95s, those are great to have on hand as well because of all of the particulates and possible carcinogens that will be floating in the air. Great to try to avoid that, especially if anybody's, got an immune system or a respiratory system that is not functioning 100%. Arrange a shelter, so identify potential accommodations ahead of time if you can. So family, friends, have an evacuation plan where you're going to go, and then just practice and rehearse it because you need to be aware. Everybody else needs to be aware. Remember that some close or access points that you would traditionally use could be blocked by emergency vehicles or by fire itself, flooding, or anything else, Angus. It's a lot there, but it's important information given the time of year, especially in North America, as we move towards the fire season here.
Yes, indeed. It's, it comes around every year, and people, I'm sure, in Canada must be fully aware of what the potential is. I've had first-hand experience of wildfires in the south of France. They are really very, very scary things, and the amount of preparation you need to think about is enormous. Because I think a lot of what people don't realise, and certainly those who never experienced these wildfires, is the speed at which they can travel. And this is why, sadly, people die, is because these fires can spread, especially if the ground is tinder dry. They can spread faster than a running horse, apparently, as many firefighters say. They're terrifying things. And it is very easy to get cut off. And this is why people in these sorts of areas obviously need to stay very tuned to the media at all times, particularly when there is a fire raging in that particular area, is because they need to know if they are being encircled. And this, again, sadly, is how people die, is they get encircled. Even firefighters themselves end up in these sort of situations where they get encircled and then they find no way out. So, yeah, absolutely. I think that's very sterling advice there, James. The problem is, what can we do about these wildfires? I mean, there's 100 different sort of discussions about them. Is it climate change? Is it arson? Sadly, a lot of these are arson. You've got these lunatics in our society that go around enjoying lighting these wretched things. And this isn't just specific to Canada. This happens all over the world, even here in the UK. On particularly dry, very dry summers that we have, we get arsonists who come out and think it's fun to light a wildfire, and then suddenly it runs out of control. And of course, the fallout from these fires is enormous. Of course, from a local perspective, the damage is devastating in terms of people losing their livelihoods, their homes, etc. It is horrible for these people who suffer this. But of course, there is a larger scale impact, because this is sending an awful lot of smoke into the atmosphere, which in turn then does travel just through simple climate capabilities. It travels south of the border into America, for example. So of course, it does have an impact elsewhere. Here in the UK, we get affected by wildfires sometimes on the continent. I mean, good heavens, we get sand from the Sahara Desert dropping on our cars sometimes if the wind is in the right direction. So yeah, we are all connected by our one global climate. So again, the impact is massive. So yeah, I think the advice there to our community in Canada is stay safe, watch the media, understand what you need to do, be prepared, get ready just in case, God forbid, one of these fires comes towards you. But I'd say good advice there, James.
There we go. And, you'd be amazed, Angus, how many people every year sit there and they just look and say, oh, it'll never come towards my house. And then a week later, you see them back on the news standing there in a pile of ashes, where they're fortunate enough that they were able to escape. And that's one of the big risks, is people just tend to think it's not going to happen to them, and therefore they don't prepare appropriately. And I think a part of it is the fear too. They don't want to admit that that's something they can't control could actually change the rest of their life and destroy everything that they've built. So it's a tough time of year. It's a tough thing to watch, but at the same time, the more prepared people are, at the end of the day, it's the lives that matter. Nothing else matters of physical possessions. It's the lives that matter, Angus, at the end of the day. But moving along here, because we are moving on a big story there that we just finished, so let's get moving on to the next one. And that is the history of the Operation Blue Star and how that works in terms of, I get people asking me, now that I've learned a bit about Sikhi and I'm still learning and such, people ask me different questions. And one of them was in relation to actually Mr. Hardeep Singh Nijjar and why people were calling him a martyr, or, different terms, a shaheed and things. So I explained to them what that means, but I thought, what a great opportunity now to talk about that, because of all of the martyrs and those who were impacted that will never be forgotten, that were at the Golden Temple in 1984. Now, with Operation Blue Star, as it wrapped up, you can see in this image on the screen, these are actually mothers and family members coming to the Golden Temple to try and locate their loved ones after the military had stopped shooting, and they came to try and do whatever they could to save the loved ones from the attacks and to, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but to identify their children as well, or their loved ones, their husbands, their fathers, and so forth. So again, just such an emotional picture for many people, but I think that it really shows the desperation when they were able to get into the temple to try and find their loved ones. I mean, I can't imagine the feeling and the emotion that they would be going through, trying to just find out if they are alive and injured, if they're just laying there suffering, or if they've passed away due to injuries. I mean, that's got to be just the most horrific feeling for a parent or a loved one. Now, as I said, we're looking at 41 years since that dreaded event, and that was that fateful day when the army stormed into such a sacred facility and place of just so much meaning. It's so much more than just religious and cultural. It was a foundation for the Sikh people. And that is what made it even worse, is that it was a place of worship. But again, such an internationally recognized location of importance. Now, the sacrifice of the casualties, and not just the martyrs, or not just as martyrs and shaheeds, but also in terms of those who survived and actually were able to document some of the atrocities for future criminal prosecution, but a lot of those documents ended up getting destroyed if they were handed over, not to mention the historic documents and books that were destroyed in the temple as well. And so, but as I said, the sacrifice that they made, and that's what this is about, is that it is such an important part of the Sikh faith that you stand there and you protect what is yours, what you believe in, and what your faith brings to you, and that is all that is holy in the Sikh temples. And of course, this complex was filled with people who were innocently just going to be a part of the pilgrimage. Children, women, as we've covered so many times before. But we'll move along here, Angus, and I just wanted to point out the main points of why they are described as shaheeds and as martyrs, and understand a bit deeper on the context. Now, defense of the faith's holiest shrine is point number one, and that is that Sikhs believe those inside the complex, especially the pilgrims and the devout individuals present, were defending their religion's most sacred site from an unprecedented military assault. Dying while protecting the Harmandir Sahib and the Akal Takht is seen as the ultimate sacrifice in the line of faith. Number 2, the sanctity of the Golden Temple. Now, the Harmandir Sahib is not just a building, as I said. It is a spiritual heart of Sikhism. It is with that military invasion that resulted in the bloodshed within its precincts and damage to its structures. And how it's viewed is just grievous, and it was desecration of that holy place. Now, those killed are seen as martyrs because, again, they fell defending this inviolable sanctity, and that is I feel like it's understating it, Angus. Number 3 is that the historical parallels to the Sikh martyrdom. Now, Sikh history is replete with examples of gurus and followers who chose death rather than renounce their faith or their principles. Example of that is Guru Arjan Dev Guru Teg Bahadur and the Chot Shabzaid. Sorry, I probably butchered that, but my apologies. I'm trying. But the death at the Golden Temple in 1984 are seen as a modern continuation of this legacy of the Shahidi or martyrdom in the face of oppression. And it's something that they've seen time and time again. As we say, history keeps repeating itself. And that's why we need to see Khalistan as a place, a safe place, and a place of leadership for the entire region to be formed. Now, the symbol of state oppression for many Sikhs, Operation Blue Star represented a disproportionate and sacrilegious act by the Indian state, by the Indian government against its own minority citizens. And those who were killed became symbols of resistance against the persecution and the fight for religious and political rights, cementing their status as martyrs. And then finally, number 5, the aftermath and the anti-Sikh programs, and that is the assassination of Prime Minister Gandhi by her bodyguards in October of 1984. Now, that triggered organized, brutal anti-Sikh riots as they were defined, and now we can finally get the world to agree that it was a genocide. It was a genocide all across India, but especially in regions like Delhi and in the Punjab region, where thousands of innocent Sikhs were murdered. The horrific violence deepened the trauma of the 1984 and reinforced the perception within the community that Sikh lives were under threat, further sanctifying the memory of those who died in Amritsar months earlier. And I'll just kind of scroll through this so you can pause your screen and read the rest of it if you wish. But at this point, you must remember that these people died for what they believe in, and you have to always respect and honor that conviction that they held so true to their heart. And with that said, just a reminder, folks, that there is the Sovereignty Rally taking place in San Francisco this weekend on the 7th at 10 o'clock a.m. It will begin at 88 2nd Street in downtown San Francisco. Please come out and support the community. Even if you are not of Sikh faith, come out and support the people in your community who have to live with the remembrance of this tragedy every day, but also to honor all of those shaheeds from 1984. Once again, 10 a.m. at 88 2nd Street in San Francisco on June the 7th. Don't forget to send us some video and footage if you happen to attend as well, please. Back to you, Angus.
Yes, indeed. And the word martyr, of course, carries a huge amount of weight with it. I mean, it's certainly in the English language, and certainly as it appears reflected in the Punjabi language and indeed other languages, the word martyr does carry an enormous implication. And this is why when the term is used, it is usually used very carefully. And likewise, we talked yesterday about how the local BJP in Punjab had actually used the word martyr referring to those who died in that complex in 1984, which was then very quickly, literally a matter of hours, retracted when, of course, the party in Delhi discovered that the local party in Punjab had referred to those who died as martyrs. And they said, oh, no, you can't do that. Why? Because, again, it's all about the weight of this word, the implications of this word. It implies implies that those who died actually had the moral superiority, that they were, in very simplistic terms, they were the good guys and the killers were the bad guys. That is basically why the term martyr is so significant. And it actually got me thinking, and James, you've gone through, I suppose, to some degree, the definitions of martyrs and why they were seen as martyrs. And it does actually reflect, as I say, this sort of form of moral superiority. Even though you happen to die, you have died taking the moral high ground. And it actually also reminded me that the definition of martyrdom got me sort of thinking, well, it's actually very similar to, for example, here in the UK, our highest award of valour for soldiers for in the military is the Victoria Cross. And I thought it actually reflects the similar sort of criteria to if you're awarded the Victoria Cross. And I just quickly looked at the definition. The criteria to be awarded the Victoria Cross is for most conspicuous bravery or some daring or preeminent act of valour or self-sacrifice or extreme devotion to duty in the presence of the enemy. And it is often awarded posthumously. Well, of course, being a martyr, by definition, it is posthumous. But basically, it is saying exactly the same thing. It is for these acts of bravery. It is acts of valour and particularly self-sacrifice and extreme devotion to duty in the presence of the enemy. In other words, again, you have the moral superiority. You were in the right and you literally gave the ultimate sacrifice for your beliefs and your devotion. And that really, I think, is again, ironically, it's a perfect mirror image of the definition for me of what it is to be a martyr. And those who died in the complex, of course, I think reflected that extreme level of valour and honour and self-sacrifice. Bindravali and his followers, particularly, I think what how they fought to the last man and to their last dying breath, I think fulfills that definition with interest. I think this whole term martyrdom is significant, and I think it is used absolutely rightly in the context of June 1984. But we also mustn't forget there have been many, many martyrs in the Sikh community right across the generations, across many decades, particularly since 1947. I mean, for example, and it's not even militarily or through sheer military might that you were martyred. I'm thinking of Jaswant Singh Kalra, a peaceful guy who gave, again, his life purely for trying to highlight the atrocities perpetrated by the Indian state, the extrajudicial killings. All he did was quietly went about researching, digging out records. And again, it's something so sort of so obscure and so dry in terms of what he was doing. But what he was actually doing was so important, so significant, and he literally sacrificed his life, knowing that his life was in danger doing this, to try and highlight the evils that the Indian state had done against innocent young Sikh men throughout the 1980s and 1990s. So again, and likewise, we have those who did actually take up arms in the 80s and 90s, those who martyred, the shaheeds across the 1980s and 90s within the Sikh community in the Punjab, who were fighting in self-defense. But again, this term martyr is so appropriate because they were standing up for their moral superiority against the Indian state. The Indian state were persecuting them, was extrajudicially murdering them. They were the Indian state were the murderers. There's absolutely no ambiguity there who was in the right and the wrong here. And the young Sikh men had no choice but to take up arms to try and defend themselves, to try and save their own lives. And they lost their lives up against this enormous force of the Indian state, and they lost their lives. And likewise, they are rightly called shaheeds or martyrs. So it is a huge term. It is used. It is not used lightly, and certainly in the case of 1984 and those who died in the complex, yeah, absolutely right, fully justified. They were martyrs, and it was a terrible event. And likewise, James, as you rightly said, this Sunday, if you're in California, get there. And if you have any events near you, wherever you are in the diaspora, get to these events. Do not let people forget. Remember the martyrs, honour their legacy, and most importantly, looking forward to the future, let these events never happen again. India's actions against the community must be highlighted, and we must continue to fight for a sovereign nation of Khalistan, because that is the only way that peace will ever come to that region, and the Sikh community can carry on its lives in peace and looking to a prosperous future, James.
Absolutely. And for any of those viewers, just a reminder, if you're looking to get parking information and route information, you can watch yesterday's program, as we covered all of that yesterday as well.
Indeed, absolutely right. Okay, James, let's move on to my first story, and again, let's turn the spotlight. If we're talking about rights and wrongs and moral upstanding and moral failures, well, India is in the spotlight in the Freedom House. Freedom House is this organisation that researches deeply. And do watch yesterday's show for some coverage of specifically recommendations they made to the Canadian Sikh community. Well, they've also done a full report. They've updated their annual report on an annual basis. They update their examination and analysis of countries around the world in terms of their freedoms, how high they stack up in the democratic ladder. In other words, are these nations democracies or are they authoritarian regimes? Well, India, sadly, well, unsurprising to report, India does not come out of it very well. And so the latest report then, and as I say, they do this every year. And they update it. And well, the good news, let's start with some good news for India. India has actually improved slightly. And India has actually gone up in the rankings. And if I show you the rankings, last year they were 66 out of 100. Actually, no, I beg your pardon. In fact, I've got it the wrong way around. In fact, things have got worse. No, there is no good news for India. I was mistaken. In fact, the higher scores are better. So the higher the score, the better it is. So India was 66 out of 100. So they were better last year. This year they have sunk to 63 out of 100. Now, I'll come on to what these scores actually mean in a moment. But in terms, just to get a reference benchmark, India sits 63 out of 100. And the report, and I won't go through in detail the report, it's a very long report, it's a very detailed report, but I'll go through the summaries of each of these elements, which makes very interesting reading. But the report is broken up into two main areas. It looks at the political rights and it looks at basic civil liberties of the people. In terms of political rights, India sits 31 out of 40, so not great. It's about 3/4 up the list, let's say. Civil liberties are around about the same sort of level. Now, to give you an idea of how this sits in relation to the rest of the world, India likes to call itself the world's largest democracy. Narendra Modi is often quoted as saying, "We are the world's largest democracy," and he says that with great pride, and it rightly is, should be a badge of honour if it was true. Well, look at those scores and let me tell you, and I'll look at some of the English-speaking democracies of the world and how they rank up. Well, USA, for example, out of 100 scores 84. So 84 out of 100, so quite a long way ahead of India. India has got a long way to go before it can stand up to the level of the USA. And the lowest, the political rights and civil liberties of the USA are 34 and 50. So USA slightly down on the political rights, but still 34 out of 40. Civil liberties, 50 out of 60, so way ahead. Now, Australia, 95 out of 100. And then 39 and 56. So again, Australia way ahead of India. UK ranks very well indeed, 92 out of 100 and 39 and 53 out of 60 there. And highest of all, James, you'd be delighted to know this one, is Canada. 97 out of 100, 39 and 58. So, in other words, just to give you a bit of a benchmark of how India is standing, is the main, let's call them the Western democracies, and I include Australia obviously in that, is the Western democracies are true democracies. They're not perfect, but they certainly stand way, head and shoulders above India in terms of this objective perspective of how they stand as democracies. So in other words, the message to Narendra Modi is, I'm afraid your cries of leading the world's democracies are actually falling way short. Now, I'm just going to quickly skip through these just to give you an idea of what actually, what makes up these aggregated scores, so you can see the elements that the report refers to. Now, one very important point here. This score that India has achieved at 63 out of 100 does not include Kashmir. So Kashmir has been removed from these scores. Now, we all know what's going on in Kashmir. Kashmir, if it was included in these scores, would sink that score way, way lower. So this is even a positive look at India. This is India through rose-tinted spectacles. This is looking at India ignoring one of its most outrageous, egregious persecutions of human rights, what's happening in J&K. So Kashmir has not even been included in this. So again, that's really bad news for India. Now, they head the report saying that India claims to be this multi-party democracy. Under Modi's BJP, it has presided over discriminatory policies and a rise in persecution affecting its minorities. The constitution guarantees civil liberties, including freedom of expression, etc., but harassment of journalists, non-governmental organisations and other government critics has increased significantly under Modi. The BJP has used government institutions to target political opponents. In other words, it's weaponising, as we often say, it's been weaponising things like the law and other state mechanisms to target and persecute its minorities. So it talks about what's happened since the last year and why it's actually dropped 3 points in its rankings. It did have elections. It talks about what's happened to the Ayodhya Temple, which we talked about in the past, the new Citizenship Amendment Act, which persecutes Muslims, and actually leading up to the elections, the arrest of Delhi's chief minister and the freezing of opposition party bank accounts on that same day just highlighted the misuse of investigative agencies to target political opposition. So again, the picture doesn't look great for India. So as I said, it breaks it down into two main areas. Firstly, politically, and secondly, on human rights. Politically, actually, India does surprisingly score reasonably well. And I'll quickly just flip through these. Was the current head of government elected through free and fair elections? Yes, it was on balance. Were current national legislative representatives elected through free and fair elections? Yes, on balance it was. Are electoral laws and framework fair? Are they implemented impartially? Well, almost is the score on that one. So it's not perfect, but it's not bad on the balance of things. Now, political pluralism, this in other words, opposition parties, how are they allowed to operate? Well, the first question, do people have the right to organise different political parties, in other words, compete against the main groupings? 3 out of 4, okay, again, not perfect, but not bad. Is there a realistic opportunity for the opposition to increase its support? In other words, can it go out there and actively campaign against, let's say, the government? Yes, to some degree is the answer to that. Are people's political choices free from domination by forces? In other words, for example, are the BJP dominating the media? Are they dominating the whole political landscape? Yeah, to some degree it does appear to be the case. And do various segments of the population, including the minorities, have political rights and electoral opportunities? Ooh, dear, no, they really don't. 2 out of 4. So in other words, the minorities, the minority groups, whether it's lower caste, whether it's the LGBT community, or whether it's a minority group like the Sikhs or the Muslims or the Christians, whatever, no, they really don't have full political rights and electoral opportunities. So again, India highlighted as failing there. Now, government functioning. Do the free elected head of government and legislative representatives determine the policy of the government? Yes, they do. Great, fantastic. Are safeguards against corruption strong and effective? No. We do know corruption is rife in India, and here it is writ large in the report. Does the government operate with openness and transparency? To some degree. I think that's actually quite a high score, I would say. I think it's, I would say, a slightly flattering score there. Right, now, where it really falls down, of course, civil liberties. So to sum up politically, the landscape in India is not bad, but it's not great. It certainly isn't a full-on democracy, it's certainly in comparison to the Western world. Now, civil liberties, though, are there free and independent media? Oh, pardon me whilst I chuckle cynically. Of course there isn't. 2 out of 4 on that one, we do know that. Are individuals free to practice, express their religious faith? Again, not really. Is there academic freedom? Is the educational system free from extensive political indoctrination? No, it most certainly isn't. Are individuals free to express their personal views on politics or other sensitive topics without surveillance or retribution? No, they are not. Association organisational rights. Is there freedom of assembly? And I've talked a lot about this in some of my podcasts. No, there really isn't total freedom of assembly. People live in fear. Is there freedom of non-governmental organisations, particularly human rights ones, and governance-related work? No, absolutely not. We do know they are targeted and they are harassed. Is there freedom for trade unions? Well, to some degree, yes, there is. And similar professional labour organisations? Well, yes. And I think that is probably reflective of the driving commercial landscape of India. It has this huge market. Commerce is obviously a big focus of the Indian government. They are trying to grow commerce. So in turn, there has been some allowance for trade unions to exist. Now, again, rule of law, big area. Is there an independent judiciary? Absolutely there is not. The law, the legislature and the judiciary are being weaponised by the Brahmins to target the minorities. Does due process prevail in civil and criminal matters? Well, you only need to look at Amritpal Singh, Jagtar Singh Jahal, amongst many others. 2 out of 4. I think, again, that's a flattering result for India, but basically no. Is there protection from the illegitimate use of physical force and freedom from war and insurgencies? No, not really. Don't forget, this doesn't include Kashmir. Can you imagine these scores if Kashmir was included? Do laws, policies and practices guarantee equal treatment of segments of the population? No, it doesn't. That's another 2 out of 4. Personal autonomy and individual rights. Do individuals enjoy freedom of movement? Well, they do to some degree, and I would agree with this. I think people, generally speaking, in India do have that ability to move around. But ironically, the Hindus specifically do have this, I would say, this increased mobility to go into places like Kashmir and Punjab, basically through some sort of level of colonialism. They are being encouraged to relocate, to move into these areas, to buy up land and by stealth colonialise these areas that are trying to drive for independence, whether it's Kashmir, whether it is Punjab and other areas. And are individuals able to exercise the right to own property, establish private businesses, etc., without interference? No, not really. Do individuals enjoy personal social freedoms, including choice of marriage partner, etc.? No, that's another 2 out of 4. Do individuals enjoy quality of opportunity and freedom from economic exploitation? Most definitely they don't. We talk a lot about how commerce is being exploited by the wealthy and the ruling elite in places like Punjab. And that's it. So again, I've had to go through that very quickly. There's an awful lot of information. I do urge our audience, if you are interested in this, there's a lot of detail, a lot of evidence supporting this. This isn't just some sort of subjective attack on India. This is an objective organisation that assesses every country in the world impartially. There is no agenda here. This is a genuine look at India. Is it a democracy? Is it this democracy that Narendra Modi claims it is? Clearly, looking at those scores, James, it is not. It is a failing democracy. And the point for Narendra Modi is it is getting worse. Year on year, these scores are declining. India is sinking into an authoritarian regime. It is not a place where freedom exists. It is not a place where minorities feel safe. They cannot practice their lives. They cannot practice their religions without fear. James, this is a bit of a shameful stain for India.
Absolutely. And if you want to know a bit more shame there and how worse it can get, Angus, is that if you factor in from the separate report, now Kashmir, India is what they call it in the separate report. And they rank for political rights 17 out of 40 and civil liberties 21 out of 60. Now, if you combine that together with the other numbers here on the screen, that actually puts them for the political rights at 24 out of 40, combined civil liberties 26.5 out of 60, bringing them in at a 50.5%, Angus, combined, including Kashmir.
I mean, I'm chuckling, but yes, absolutely right. I mean, again, Narendra Modi, his main superpower as he shakes hands with all the world leaders is, I am the world's largest democracy. When suddenly, actually, you look at it analytically like this, how that totally undermines his argument. He is not a future democratic superpower. He is a future authoritarian superpower, like China, like Russia. If that's where he wants to be, then that's certainly where he's heading. And as you rightly say, James, you factor in Kashmir into this, and you can't ignore Kashmir. And Freedom House, I think, have only done understand that because they just wanted to highlight the fact that Kashmir, how bad the situation is in Kashmir itself. But certainly if you combine the two, and I think really from our perspective, you have to combine the two. You can't look at India without looking at Kashmir. India says, we own Kashmir. Well, okay, we'll own the responsibility of the statistics then, of the analysis. And as you pointed out, James, their ranking in the Global Freedom House Index is really shameful. It's shameful even without Kashmir. Put Kashmir in there, it is absolutely shocking. So anyway, if you're interested in this, do have a look at that report. There's a lot of information in there, and sadly I had to go through it a bit too quickly, but yeah, wow, I think the conclusions are very clear, and it doesn't look very good for India. So James, let's move on to my second story. And again, talking about India's shame. Well, in the United States, we do often talk about how India, and particularly the RSS, spreads its tentacles of oppression and persecution out from domestic targets, like its minorities in India, out to the minorities in the diaspora areas, particularly through Western diasporas. We do know the RSS is very, very active, and it takes many forms. And one of those forms, particularly in the United States, is the Hindu American Foundation. And James, you and I, we've talked about the HAF on quite a regular basis because they are very active. They do spread their wings very actively across the United States. They even, in fact, I think, was it last week or the week before, we talked about how the HAF had accused the World Sikh Organization of bullying the Sikh community. Yes, despite the fact that it actually represents the Sikh community, the HAF actually publicly came out and said, no, the WSO is bullying Sikhs into supporting Sikh issues, which again in itself was pretty risible. But it does highlight the fact that the HAF is basically, it is a front for the RSS. It is a front for this whole huge blunt instrument that is persecution of the minorities that's stemming from India. So as a result, part of the fight back from the Sikh community has actually come from one of the largest Gurdwaras in the States. This is the Fremont Gurdwara in California. And their management team has actually released a press release, and they are targeting the HAF. They are fighting back. They've done a huge amount of work behind the scenes. They've done a lot of research, a lot of digging. They've got a legal team working on this as well. They're saying, no, it's about time we stood up for ourselves and fought back against this RSS-driven force of the HAF. And they have actually, they've gone to the Department of Justice using their legal team to say, right, we need to do something about this because it's very clear what's going on here, who the HAF are and what they're doing. So the Gurdwara Committee brought in a group called Lex Politica. They are a law practice in the States who helps organisations like the Sikh community, for example, and the Gurdwaras to highlight areas of human rights abuse, to highlight organisations that are being used and abused by foreign governments to target individuals within the United States. So the Gurdwara has just released this press release, and they're saying we are now looking and investigating the HAF and asking the question: is it a functioning, unregistered foreign agent for the Indian government? And they've been very clever about this. They're saying, look, there is this new legislation in the United States. It's called the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Under the FARA, as it's called, is that foreign agents have to register themselves. They have to be registered as acting on behalf of a foreign nation. And it has to be, it's all part of this transparency drive, particularly brought in by Trump, saying that we want to ensure that any organisation or body in the United States that is acting on behalf of a foreign nation, we know what it's up to, that it is in the public domain, that is fully transparent, what it is, who's funding it, what they're doing, and what their agenda is. And so the Gurdwara in Fremont has turned the spotlight on the HAF. They've got this law firm to help them, to assist on this, to go to the Department of Justice and say, you need to look at the HAF, you need to examine what they're doing, you need to see who's funding them, and actually highlight the fact if indeed they are acting on behalf of the RSS based in India. And one of the spokespersons from the Gurdwara, a lady called, I can't see her name now, so there she is, Surinderjit Kaur. She said, under President Trump, foreign-backed intimidation against American citizens, including Sikh Americans, will come to an end. And she said the Hindu American Foundation pushes India's agenda in Washington. The Indian embassy calls their relationship fiduciary. And that's why FARA experts have urged the Justice Department to evaluate HAF's need to register as a foreign agent. FARA registration delivers the transparency our communities need to stay safe. Now, fiduciary, what they call fiduciary. If the relationship, as it calls itself, is fiduciary, this is a term that implies a formal loyalty or a relationship, a powerful relationship between bodies and a trusted representation. It's often used in legal or financial context. So if indeed this relationship between the HAF and the Indian Embassy in Washington is fiduciary, it implies essentially by extension that the HAF is acting on behalf of the Indian state. So all its actions are not independent. They are not just representing Hindus in America. They actually represent interference and an agenda on behalf of the Indian state. So again, it's a very legal argument, this, but it's very important, it's very significant, because it basically means that the HAF's agenda will be put into the public domain. They cannot deny that they are therefore acting on behalf of the Indian state, and any actions that they take against the Sikh community particularly, like example calling out the WSO, will be seen as a completely biased, prejudiced agenda targeted by the Indian state against a minority in the US. In other words, it would be illegal under FARA. And as she said, the spokesperson said, no foreign government should be able to operate covert influence campaigns inside the US through unregistered proxies. Failure to comply with FARA undermines both legal accountability and public trust. That was a quote from the founder of Lex Politica. This complaint is about defending American sovereignty, exposing covert foreign influence, and ensuring that US citizens are not silenced or subjected to foreign-backed intimidation on American soil. So very powerful words, all related, of course, to transnational oppression. This is a fantastic fight back by the Sikh community in California. That diaspora community in California has been so active politically and lobbying-wise. And again, this forms one part of this huge multilateral fight back against transnational oppression. Well done to the Gurdwara in Fremont. Again, a very clever, very shrewd, but very powerful attack back on India now. And James, very pleased to see this. I think this really will have those back in India thinking, oops, I think we've got a problem here. I think the HAF is about to be outed, basically as a proxy weapon of America to target US Sikhs.
And here we have Chandra Arya starting up the new organization here in Canada. So we'll see how far that gets him, because with all of the scrutiny in Canada for the foreign and, the outside influence, we'll see how that works as well, because that might be followed suit to see what their link is as well. So.
Indeed. So the HAF will be squirming a little bit in their seats right now as the long arm of the law suddenly reaches out to grab it by the scruff of the neck and to look it deep into the eyes and say, what are you up to, guys? So well done to the California team out there on that one. Okay, James, time marching on. Let's move on to our comments column. Thank you, as always, to our wonderful, loyal audience. And thank you to those many who've just put their first comments in. Of course, we've got lots of new names that have appeared in the comments column. So thank you and welcome to those who are new to the channel. Now, but one of our regulars, Hat B, says, the world should never forget no genocide is okay. Of course, we're talking about 1984. All the victims of India's crimes, we're here to tell their stories that they cannot. Yes, indeed, this is important because, of course, the martyrs that we've talked a lot about on today's show, the martyrs, of course, are not here to tell their story. It is up to those of us who are left, the family members, the young generation who need to hear the stories, because their stories, the stories of the martyrs, must never be forgotten. And the one wonderful thing about the Sikh community is they are very strong on this. They ensure that people, that the young generations, are educated about what their history is, what their culture, their background is, and particularly those who gave their lives to promote the Sikh community into the place where it is now. So very, very important that those stories are passed down, and that people like us, even we, James, hold a very small part in reminding the world and telling the world about what those who died represented and why they died, why they gave the ultimate sacrifice. And then we talked about that BJP post talking about the martyrs. And as Hatby rightly says, it was a political football. It was only used to blame the Congress Party, because of course the Congress Party or Indira Gandhi's Congress Party were behind Operation Blue Star. The BJP government wanted to put all the blame on Congress to deflect attention away from themselves. But the RSS and then BJP were involved with the attacks too. Yes, indeed. Ultimately, who was responsible for the attacks? It was Indira Gandhi, but ultimately it was the Brahmanical controlling. It was the Brahmanical ruling elite of India that were behind this. And as you rightly point out, Saka means Holocaust. It was a Holocaust against the Sikh community, James. So again, we talk about these powerful words, martyr, shaheeds, Saka. They are all the words rightly used in this context.
That's right. Yeah,
and SSI Singh,
for us to be able to have the honor to be a part of reminding the world of these atrocities and what's transpired, we don't take that responsibility lightly. Angus, I know that we take that very seriously, and we want the community to reach out if we misspeak. But at the same time, I think that these words are dead on accurate.
Indeed they are. And SSI Singh, follows the same theme. I think our audience are totally on alignment with this about what it's all about. Yeah. Is the BJP just playing politics? They're just using Operation Blue Star as this political football to attack the Congress Party. It's only a vote call, absolutely right. And human, actually, again, comes back to the point I think that I was making. The ideology of hate exists and it passes to Congress then to BJP. In other words, the ideology of hate is the one consistent thing here. It doesn't matter which party is in power. It's just this same persecution of the minorities, particularly here in the Sikh community. And who is behind that? Well, again, it's the one core it's the core of hatred that exists in India, and that core of hatred sits squarely in the lap of the Brahmins, the ruling elite. They want to maintain their control over India. They took control from the British in 1947. They ensured that the constitution was written to maintain that control and to continue that control. It was written by the Brahmins for the Brahmins, and it doesn't matter which political party is in power, whether it's the BJP, whether it's Congress or whatever. It is the Brahmin, it is the upper elite members who are the puppets who act on behalf of the ruling elite of India, and they continue that thread of hatred and persecution throughout the whole of India's history. They're carrying it into the future. That is why the Sikh community are so targeted, because they know what's going on. They are standing up to this. They seem to be the only people in India who are actually calling it out for what it is, and that is why they are being targeted, James. So it doesn't matter whoever's in power. It's only ever going to stop when the Sikhs get their own homeland, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And just quickly there, I mean, the ideology of hate is just spot on as well, for the fact that the ideological concept of hate is not one that they're born with. It's one that's taught. And you said it so rightly, Angus, that it is going to continue into the future if they don't find a way to start curbing that. And one of the main ways, and probably the only way to curb that, will be for them to have their own sovereign nation as a Sikh community. So.
Yeah, and I think the Freedom House report just highlights the fact that it's not getting any better, it's getting worse.
That's right.
Avtar Dhillon says, Sikhism is for humanity. It's not just for Punjabis. One must read the Sikh holy book to get the essence of God. It just shows the Indian government is all about materialism and power, which lasts as long as the flowers God makes. Have a good day, guys. It's raining like mad in commentary. Well, it was, I know, it was a day or two ago that you wrote that comment, so thank you. Yes, I hope it's a little bit drier in the Midlands today for you. But yes, I think this is a very important point, is that Sikhism is all about, it's not just for Punjabis. Sikhism represents what is good about humanity. And I must confess, I have not read the Sikh holy book, but I do know that the essential core philosophies of Sikhi, and it does actually reflect, as I often say, it reflects all that is good about humanity. And it isn't just relevant to the Punjab. It isn't just relevant to small areas. It is global. It is all about, we are a one human family. We are all seen as equals under Sikhi. And interesting that you talk about it. The Indian government is all about materialism and power. It's not just the Indian government. It's humanity as a whole. There are elements within our society that are always driven. I often talk about the 1 in 10s. It is the 1 in 10 people that are genetically driven to want material goods, to want possessions, to want power and control. That is what drives them genetically. It is the George Soroses, the Tony Blairs, the Narendra Modis of the world, the Saddam Husseins, whoever it may be. These are the 1 in 10 people who just have that genetic drive to control, to want to own everything. That is what drives them, and that is what Sikhi exists to stand up against, James.
Absolutely. I was just laughing. I had a moth flying across the screen as I was trying to focus on you. But no, absolutely. And that is so accurate in the fact that everybody who understands the principles of Sikhi can't argue with them. I mean, they are just so clear cut. And the big thing about Sikhism is that the Sikhs practice what they believe. They stand by what they believe. They don't just read it and then when they're out of church on Sunday go and do whatever they want. Sikhi, they go to the Gurdwara, they live what they believe, Angus.
Indeed, and one of the unique attractions about Sikhi, to me particularly, is they respect other religions because they share so many same values with other religions. So they don't try and convert people to Sikhi. They say, no, I respect the moral foundations of your religion because they reflect a lot of mine. So my efforts will be to make you a better Muslim, make you a better Christian, make you a better whatever it is. And again, it's almost unique to Sikhi, and I think it's such a deep attraction about the religion as a whole. It's incredible. Now, a final set of comments. Rick Singh, June 1984. I have absolutely no idea what this meant, and I use Google Translate, which usually helps me translate some of these comments. Maybe members of our audience can help us with this one, James. I do hope it's not a rude word, but I think hopefully it does. Well, who knows what it means? Maybe our audience can enlighten us, unless it's a beautiful piece of artwork, James.
Even if it's a rude word, we got to learn those too, Angus, just so we know when somebody's upset with us.
Of course, as a child, when you're learning a foreign language, one of the first words that you want to learn, of course, it's all the rude words, so forgive us. Punjab 1849, thanks for covering all the facts. Well, that is exactly what we're here for. And I think apologies to M. Verdi, I missed your comment, saying the same thing. Thanks to both of you for telling the truth to the world. Absolutely. That is why we are here. We are here to cover the facts and the truth. We're not here as a propaganda channel to spread some sort of nonsense agenda. We're actually here just to report the simple truth. We are but simple messengers, James. We are messengers of the truth, so that hopefully our audience, particularly our audience in India, who gets such a one-sided view of every issue, is that we hopefully do provide a bit more of a balanced view and hopefully the truth, James.
Absolutely. And once in a while we do get it wrong, and we appreciate and respect when we get called out on it because, hey, we do make mistakes. We are learning, but we want to learn more. So if we get something wrong, by all means, don't be shy to let us know. We appreciate that as well.
Absolutely. And the final honor goes to Kuldeep Kaur, who says, thank you, Angus and James. Love your show. Well, thank you for your comment. And the way you engage with your viewers, well, it's an absolute pleasure. We could not do this show without you. You even mentioned my comment. Of course we did. Look, we've done it again. So there you go, Kuldeep. Thank you for joining us. And if you comment, if you provide interesting, funny, whatever, even rude comments, we're very happy to talk about them and debate them, particularly if you've got interesting comments about things that you'd like us to cover, or informative comments, or even comments correcting us where we get things wrong. Of course, we love to talk about your comments. It is all about interacting with our audience. It is all about bringing you, our wonderful audience, into the show and sharing your thoughts and indeed perspectives. That's why we call the show Perspectives, because we want to broaden the perspectives on all the issues that we talk about. So please do keep those comments coming in. But that is it, yes, indeed, for another day and indeed another week. Another week has passed. There will be a podcast uploaded tomorrow with Dr. Sandhu, a fascinating podcast. Do keep your eyes out for that one when it pops up tomorrow on the channel. But that is it for another day, and do keep the comments coming in. Don't forget you can message us directly at message@satellite.com if there's something you'd like to bring to our attention directly. But in the meantime, have a great week to our wonderful audience, and have a great weekend. Keep an eye out for the podcast. We will see you on Monday. It is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.